distinguished lecture series of this meeting has brought forth to this podium numerous Turing Award, Eckert-Mockley Award, and Nobel laureates. This year, we are truly delighted to have the person we have speaking for us this evening. To introduce him is indeed quite an honor, and I will introduce him by presenting him with an award which truly recognizes his seminal contributions to the field of computer science and computer engineering. It's the Computer Pioneer Award of the IEEE Computer Society. This award was established by the Computer Society to recognize and honor the vision of those people whose efforts resulted in the creation and continued vitality of the electronic computer industry. Those folks who have truly made a difference and have changed the way we fundamentally think about that which we do build and use. Doug Engelbart, who's receiving this award this evening, joins a list of people that is truly stellar in the field. Those of you who follow the field with any kind of historical perspective will recognize the names that I will read of the previous recognized Pioneer Award winners and understand only then the role in which Doug is esteemed to be placed. Jeffrey Chu, Art Burks, Harry Husky, John Artensoff, Nick Rochester, Jerry Haddad, Bill Vanderpool, Nick Metropolis, John Kemeny, Ivan Sutherland, John McCarthy, Dave Wheeler, Alan Perlis, Kurt Hurd, Jim Pomerine, Peter Nauer, Adrian Van Weingarten, Robert Everett, Art Samuel, Reynold Johnson, Klaus Wirth, Frederick Bauer, Marcia Hoff, John Koch, Ralph Palmer. These are people who have had truly distinguished careers in this field. And we are absolutely delighted to be able to recognize the contributions of Doug Engelbart. Those of you who saw the series that was on PBS some 3 or 4 months ago on the history of computing recognized a segment, I'm sure, in which Doug's pioneering work in human-computer interaction was presented. Doug currently is director of the Bootstrap Institute. He was born in Portland, Oregon. He served as a U.S. Navy officer and as electronics technician during World War II and received his B.S. in electrical engineering from Oregon State University in '48. He worked at NACA before it became NASA, Ames Lab, until 1951, before going on to earn his Ph.D. in EE at the University of California at Berkeley. His thesis was on applying plasma phenomena to digital devices. The work resulted in the issuance of 12 patents. He stayed at Berkeley as assistant professor until 1956, when he left for Stanford Research Institute, now SRI International, where he worked on magnetic computer components and studied digital device phenomena and miniaturization scaling potential. This work produced another 12 patents. In 1959, Dr. Engelbart launched the SSRI Augmentation Research Center, which he directed until 1977. The center provided him with the opportunity to pioneer modern interactive working environments, for which he is being honored by this award. Using his NLS as the exploratory vehicle for research into the knowledge worker organization, the basic results not only included the development of two-dimensional editing, the concept of Windows cross-file editing, uniform command syntax, the mouse, remote procedure call protocols, mixed text graphic files, and structured document files, idea processing, hypertext, and many more things. It basically became a paradigm of thinking about computing and something that changed the field dramatically. When he left the center, he had some 47 members. It is with great honor and distinction that I present to Doug this medal for the Society. Douglas C. Engelbart, Human-Computer Interaction Pioneer, awarded 1992. Thank you very much. We'll put this here. The lavalier.
Wouldn't it be funny if I truly became speechless? There were years there when I was worried. I was surrounded by a wife and 3 daughters in the 60s, and at the dinner table it was very, very hard to get a word in edgewise, so I managed to surmount all that. And the next hazard is for me to forget what I was going to say. So more and more as you get old, you find yourself stumbling, like you can't even remember the name of your street or something. And so I have this wife sitting here to whom I owe a great, great deal about how to get here. Thank you, Ballard. And she's normally not one to make great jokes, but she did a classic on me when about the 30th time in a month I complained about, God, I just can't remember that. You know, I just can't remember like I used to. Doug, the problem with you is you can't remember how bad your memory used to be. So with that, you guys are going to be lucky to get a coherent talk. What I really want to try with you is really weaving into a story about what I've been trying to do for many years, a real thread about paradigms. I didn't even know what it was until maybe 10 years ago, but I found out I had other names for it. And then in thinking back, I realized that the issue of paradigms was something just had an immense effect on my life, and not all of it particularly pleasant. But I really felt it was worth a lot because as the theme was announced, I really truly feel that probably the biggest single factor in limiting how well the technologies that are emerging can be integrated into society to produce really beneficial, positive benefits, etc. The biggest single factor limiting how rapidly and effectively we can do that is an issue of paradigms. And the paradigms have to shift in order for us to integrate that stuff so that it can be really useful. And John C. Brown just was hitting the nail right on the head as far as I'm concerned today, and I'd like to just go about that more. So first off, I thought I'd read definitions of paradigm. And I'm reading it from a book by Joel Barker, who is sort of, I guess, today's guy who goes around talking a lot about what are paradigms and how much they affect your life. But he said, well, one of the first who brought paradigms forward was Kuhn in the late 60s in the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He wrote that scientific paradigms are accepted examples of actual scientific practice, examples which include law, theory, application, and instrumentation, etc. These provide models from which spring particular coherent traditions of scientific research. Men whose research is based on shared paradigms are committed to the same rules and standards for scientific practice. All right, let's go down. Adam Smith in The Powers of Mind. A shared set of assumptions. The paradigm is the way we perceive the world. Water to the fish. The paradigm explains the world to us and helps us predict its behavior. When we are in the middle of the paradigm, it is hard to imagine any other paradigm. So the book goes on to describe a lot of the effects of paradigm, how they get shifted. And the basic thing in there, though, that I want to bring about is that if you have a different paradigm about the way you look at things, there are things you just don't perceive about what can be in a different paradigm. And I wasn't exactly prepared for that, but I think back, and the thing that kicked me off in all this pursuit was 41 years ago. And it established for me a whole new paradigm. I got engaged. And the next Monday, driving to work, I started to think, well, I better settle down and think about the road ahead at work. And I thought, geez, that's funny. Now they got a steady job, which to a depression kid is an essential thing. There was a nice place to work, but it was like a hallway down to infinity with nothing but a few spar doors and no great events. Hey, what's my professional goal structure? Steady job? Well, and then I got to thinking more about that. Well, what would professional goals be? So by that evening, I'd sort of said, you know, what I'm going to do is try to develop a set of professional goals for what I really want out of my profession. And some horrible thing happened then is I made the terrific blunder of just trying on for the hell of it. What if you set as a professional goal to see how much you can benefit mankind? What's the most I can do in a career to benefit mankind? Totally, you know, I warn everybody against it. Don't try that. But I was 25 going on 26. Idealistic enough to stick with it, and says, well, I'll put in there enough money to make out all right. There ought to still be a lot of lenience. So I spent weeks thinking about what would I do. And I tried all kinds of crusades in my mind. Well, the world really needs a better economic theory. I'll go study economics and generate a brand new economic theory. Geez, Doug, you're 6 or 8 years behind the other kids that would be doing that. That's a bad head start. Well, I'll go into education. I'll do that. The world needs that. Then I'd realize, well, again, I'm behind. Well, what kind of crusades could I join? And I kept thinking about them, and I'd read enough about some crusades to realize that, yes, you could go drain all the swamps in the bad, mosquito infection areas so you could cure malaria. You'd get rid of malaria. But the natives would all then overpopulate right away, and the side effects would probably be bad. So one day after several months of this, it suddenly dawned on me, you know what one of the problems is? The world is too complicated. The problems we're facing are too complex, and there isn't enough time to work on them. Just this one of trying to figure out what you'd like to, how you could best contribute. So just within minutes, something dawned on me. Oh, there's a challenge. How you can help human organizations and institutions better cope with complexity and urgency. Click into place. And it's been locked ever since. So that's what I'd been a radar technician during World War II and had an electrical engineering degree, and I knew enough about that computers could print and do funny things, and I knew what radar could do about any kind of a display on a scope, and I knew that anything, if a computer could print or punch cards, it could produce anything you wanted to on a display. So you could sit there in front and interact in front of a display and interact with it and get all kinds of really interesting new symbology, because a computer could really work with you. You could do new ways of thinking. And other colleagues could be sitting at workstations that are tied to that same computer complex, and you could be collaborating. Bingo. So that launched a career. That was in the spring of 1951. And a month or so later, someone suspecting girl actually went ahead and married me. And what I do, right away drag her off to Berkeley to graduate school, because they had computers there. So it's a start of a long thing. Turned out that what I was talking about doing was way too radical. Interactive computing, we don't even have our computer working yet. We got to travel down to UCLA and see the first Western automatic computer, the SWAC, was sitting there working. I had been to graduate school about 8 or 9 months before we took that trip. That's the first computer I ever saw. It had maybe 500 words of memory and a mean free time to failure of less than 10 minutes. And think of all the guys that were excited using it. So you can imagine that there's some guy sitting there with a paradigm about what you could do with these computers interactively someday, and you ought to get started thinking about it, and computers were in that state. Well, by the time I got a PhD, or had to do some thesis work, it was any interactive use of the computer was out. They just didn't believe in it. Computer time is too expensive and it's too crazy. How about manipulating symbolic logic to help you think. How about interactive teaching machines that are right there with you? Too radical. So I did some component research and got out, and but figured I could. You know, I was told then that if you keep up talking about what you're talking about, you'll be an acting assistant professor forever. Which, well, I believed him because of the way it was communicated to me. So I decided I'd go to SRI, and I figured that if any management any place in the world could be talked into exploring this, I could potentially get a research contract for them at SRI. So meanwhile, I'll be a good boy and work in my room and board. So I got a whole bunch more patents and got credibility. And also had the experience of working my way very rapidly into a professional fraternity. It was great. You know, I'd be on national committees, giving talks, organizing things. This was in about 3 or 4 years. And I've never had that experience since, because then I got enough credibility that I said, I want to start this thing about using computers. And I really mean it, that if I don't get to start it here, I'm going to leave and go someplace else. Oh, well, we'll give you some part-time chance to do it. And a little later, I got a grant from an obscure Air Force research office. And I went within about 2 weeks from being somebody who had the reputation of being able to write clearly, talk clearly, invent well, etc. like that. The needle just went down like this. No, for you guys, it went like this. First think piece I wrote, and my boss looked at it. 13 pages? You know, I can't even tell after the first 4 pages what you're talking about. I said, yeah, I know. It takes a while to describe each concept. Well, look, here's a paper written by your friend Bill. It's a proposal. The whole proposal takes 1 page. It's in he's going to work on an algorithm for switching theory. So I look at it and says, yeah, but that field is all established, and all the vocabulary is there, and it takes about 2 sentences to describe the problem, a couple of sentences to describe an approach, and a few more like that. Geez, I can't even get you to understand in all these pages about what I'm trying to do. And, well, that was my fault. And so this was my first bumping into Paradigm, and it's been there over and over and over again. So what I'd like to do is well, let's see. First, I'll just recount a little bit more history. Extremely lucky after a few years to get some research money from ARPA that off and on between them and NASA and the Air Force. It lasted me till I guess 12 or 13 years, quite a long time in that community. What I had done before that, in preparing for this whole thing, is in the later 50s, realizing that I was implicitly assuming that computer power was going to get faster and cheaper and smaller, and that would only come about with miniaturization. And in those days, they were talking about building integrated circuits with transistors, and there was a lot of talking at the sessions. So I got a grant to do a study on making things smaller, and electronic components particularly. And this was a very exciting thing. But after about 3 months of that, I realized when I discovered dimensional scaling, and it's really an art in physics, that you can do a lot of interesting things with dimensionless numbers and the like to sort of anticipate the sorts of variations that are going to occur in devices or phenomena if you change the physical scale. And so that cleared up for me enough. Yes, there are all kinds of phenomena that we haven't any experience with because we don't play with things that small. And when you get down to very small, you've got a whole new dictionary of interesting concepts and phenomena to harness into devices. So no worry at all. Interesting one. Today's pursuit of nanotechnology is just, I don't know, I'm just convinced that it's going to come. Anyway, I was convinced enough that I could go on after all this stuff I was trying to do about interactive computing and problem solving, etc., because I felt very confident that the digital power is going to be there. So that then the next thing, though, was quite dramatic for me to learn as I was reading about all that, is in biology there were a number of very interesting treatises about what happens when you scale living organisms. how big could a tree be? Well, it turns out dimensional scaling and stuff, that the fiber strength limits you, that you can't have a tree much like 300 feet or something is the absolute limit by which a tree could hold itself up. And things like the smallest mammal north of Spitsbergen is a fox, because as they're smaller, their surface to volume ratio goes up, and they can't maintain the warm blood and stuff like that. And many, many things. And that was just really interesting. So one thing I did when I gave a talk to people about dimensional scaling of components was talk to a room like this and say, what do you think would happen if you looked around, somebody played a trick on you and made everything that you can see 10 times bigger in every dimension? So the way your eye spans, there'd be nothing changed about the perspective of things. Do you think you'd notice it? Well, as it turns out, you certainly would, because the strength of any object is proportional to its cross-sectional area, but the load on it goes up with the volume. So every muscle and every structural thing has essentially 10 times the load to carry it. So your chair isn't built for you that's 10 times as heavy. And your body isn't either. You'd fall to the ground. You'd break your bones. You'd have trouble breathing. You'd have trouble ingesting food. No one could come to your help because no one else can move or something. So it would be rather drastic. So that stayed in my mind. So later I want to ring that bell in you as we get going. So anyway, the system we built carried us out in the I may as well tell you that by the mid-70s, the system we built with hypertext and interactive things and all that was very dramatic, but it just didn't happen to fit the perspective that everybody else in the research field and in the computer field and the office automation field perceived as how computers should be used. So some of the things like the mouse and the other things we had done were credited very nicely, but we lost our research funding. ARPA shut us down. You're not being relevant, you're going in the wrong direction. SRI replaced me as manager of the lab I'd built up because I apparently been doing bad things. People actually suspected me of being sneaky and misleading people. And it turns out that once you get on the other side of the paradigm, it's as though you're a political radical, and people are slightly embarrassed. They expect what you're going to say. They shut their ears. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And so there were quite a few like that through the years. And it was very bruising. I lost my lab. I lost my job. I had to go out in the commercial. It turns out we could tell everybody, let's take that system out. And they decided to auction it off, and we went off into the commercial world, industrial world. It was a very rough life with very little leeway for giving people a chance to try things new. But we learned a great deal out of that. So am I bitter about all of that experience? Well, I'm sort of bruised a little bit by it, but what it reminded me of is the time I fell off a runaway horse, a real runaway horse, with its ears rigid, running as fast as it could run, totally unresponsive to reins or anything else like that, just moving like crazy. Went over a ditch, and it got to the next choice, and it went the way I didn't think it was going to go, so I fell off, and I thought I'd done very well because I was bareback. Bareback. But anyway, so was I mad at the horse? No. So, it's a fact of life. So one of the really interesting things then to really start looking and realizing how totally human is this business of a paradigm, and how much every one of us can just totally go along, not recognize things. I watch my own experiences a few times too, and I don't generally publicize them, but yes, I was totally blind to things, and a few years later I was kind of shaken by it. How did I ever think like that? I noticed. So anyway, you can ask yourself, if the ARPANET had as much success as it did between when it opened in 1970 and the early 80s when personal computers came out, how in the world could all the personal computers be built assuming they were going to sit there in your desk and not be interconnected? See? You couldn't tell anybody. Steve Jobs just said, nope, you can have all you want. You don't have to be bothered with time sharing delay like that. IBM, of all people, built theirs, came out in the market, no provisions for it. So you ask yourself, how many years? That's almost a decade, at least 8 years. 8 years of lost opportunity for the world to really start thinking about what you do to connect your personal computers and interact and really have significant mail. Everybody in the ARPANET was using mail, FTP, file transfer. The time-sharing systems there were operating as servers. And we actually had a server model back and forth with, anyway, never mind. There's lots of examples. So how do we keep from suffering like that? So what I want to do is go through how did I generate some of the models I did, and they're still sitting there as something I try to get the world to listen. Timeshare is the company that bought us, auctioned from SSRI. McDonnell Douglas in 1984 bought Timeshare and TimeNet and a number of other organizations to start their new line of business out in the commercial world, commercial information processing. And through those experiences, it was really interesting to go out and actually try changing. The system in its commercial use got used by thousands of people, and some of them in big organizations with dramatic kinds of capabilities that aren't there yet in many other systems. So we had lots of experience. And about 5 years ago, I kept trying to get McDonnell Douglas and others to realize that what they've got there is something that really is a very basic sort of thing that, if it's going to be useful out to the world, has to be evolved with collaboratively among a lot of organizations. And they couldn't see that. So I decided to go raise a flag on a little independent thing called the Bootstrap Institute to say, what I'm really trying to do now is get the world to look at this framework, this way of thinking. And in amongst there's a strategy for how it could improve it. So I'm going to get independent and try to sell this strategy. So I'll start showing you some of that strategy. And is this all set to go? And turn on the slides, please. Maybe I should have pushed the forward button. Yeah. 1962, making a think piece. It was a very important step. It was the most important thing I'd ever read in all this. There was a funny little report by 2 authors from RAND Corporation. We're talking about how to organize multi-discipline projects. And they said, you're going to suffer if you just bring these different disciplines together. You'll get this kind of harassing. They'll say, oh, our discipline's already solving that. Or, this is a trivial problem, it isn't worth working on, etc. That's the same thing through the 50s I was experiencing. So he said, what you need is to have a framework, a conceptual framework that's appropriate for the research you're going to do. The process of generating a framework, let's call it search. So I said, all right, I'm going to make a framework, because I couldn't get anybody to listen. So I spent 3 years, and in 1962 published this SSRI report, and a year and a half later it came out as a chapter in a book. Anyway, that started me. This was a little over 30 years ago, and the framework that I felt there is just steered me as straight as anything, and I'd really like to talk. What to do? It said there, you need to have more interaction with the display. So we did research and came up with this kind of device. And we got to have displays instead of typewriters, because the future, that's the way you're going to work. So why waste time on a technology that's not going to be there in the future? That's a very basic sort of strategic kind of issue, which we should still be listening about. Why waste time doing experiments in your organization with technologies that are going to be out of date in 5 years or 10 years? See? So let's just generate the video display. This is a kind of workstation terminal. Interesting bullpen where we all did our work. And group meetings, 1967, all of us around with a very flexible outline processor doing our work. That, in case you don't recognize it. 1968, I talked the computer conference into letting me have an hour-and-a-half session. So this was the hall in Brooks Hall in San Francisco, 20-foot screen. And this is the kind of video projector they had in those days. It was very, very powerful, black and white. And anyway, up in front we had a workstation for me that was disengaged with a monitor here with a TV camera catching my face, another TV camera moving down. In the back of the room, Bill English sat there with the controls of switching and frame splitting and such. And so this, oh, I got that slide in, turned around. But anyway, we could split the frame and get the picture of me along with the stuff I was showing, and split it another way, and I could show the way we were working, and that was the debut of the mouse. And this other key set here is something we brought along with it, so you can chord in the characters you want to do, so you very seldom have to take your hands off. This combination, if you're just moving around and navigating and doing things. And John was mentioning the invisible interface today. Well, you see people working like this, the speed and flexibility and invisibility to them, it's unparalleled in anything else going on today, so we still live like that. And that's the key set in the chording code, which I'm not expecting you to memorize that. And when Jeff Rulison would come on there to show the way we organize our source code and stuff, we could just bring his face right up in the back, and he's telling everybody. He's 35 miles away down at SSRI doing the thing. And they've zoomed in and watched his hand working on here as he was telling people, and he was unconscious of them showing that, and it was very dramatic, just the way he was talking and moving around, the way that hand was really looking like that. Bill Paxton came on like that and switched over and was showing us the retrieval schemes that you could use with a ciphertext structured thing like that. So we did a lot of that shared window stuff. The architecture of it by the mid-70s had it built into the system. So I'm here giving a demonstration that's projected up on the screen, and we call up somebody else who's in Washington, D.C., and pretty soon there's his screen, and he's running it and telling us, talking over the speakerphone to us. So we're doing that as a matter of course. And what's a little bit different about this is Ballard took this, we're in Singapore, and the other guy's in Washington, D.C., and they're just 12 hours apart. So interacting very effectively on 1200 baud, I think that was at that time. But anyway, so a lot of history, a lot of technology, a lot of experience out in the world. So what does the paradigm stuff got to do with that? Okay, I made a map of, if it starts out with an objective of making organizations a lot more effective, I said, oh, first new paradigm is what you have to do is look at the whole capability infrastructure. Oh, the next one is that there's a whole system that augments humans to provide that. Oh, the next one is you need to provide the coevolution of the elements of that pragmatically. Oh, then a question, what's the most payoff if you're trying to do that complex pursuit? Oh, search of an investment criteria, because the scale of the job of really getting a whole system augmentation thing for any organization is an immense scale job, so you can't just plow straight ahead effectively. What's an investment criteria? Oh, I ended up with a sort of a model about what the improvement process elements are that could lead to a bootstrapping strategy. And with that it says, what's the most effective technology to go after first? Oh, the capabilities from this infrastructure that would be best to go after early with something that I gave the name of Kodiak capabilities. And it needs to have global interoperability, so the best support for that would be a multimedia open hyperdocument system. So that's how the 1960s, something like that, came to all that. Deployment targets, advanced pilots improving, getting this whole process started. So what I'm going to do, these are photographs taken from a multimedia dynamic presentation I can give. So I'm going to walk through all that. And there's more there than we can talk about really, and I'll try to hit, the high spot would be here, and here, and here, and here, and this. So we'll just see. I'm pretty absent-minded, but if I can fly fast enough, we'll see that. All right. So it says, all right, the objective, high-performance organizations. I'm not getting into too much detail, there's not enough time, but that's what we really want. And thinking that today's organizations, if you think about them as social organisms with what kind of functional performance capabilities do you see today that you liken it to very sluggish, dumb, dim-witted, nearsighted organisms, right? Nothing personal. By the way, I'm not talking about whatever organization you come from, of course. So, the approach that I evolved after a while, and you'll see more of the reason there, is what I call the capability infrastructure. That there's a big infrastructure capabilities built atop what we're born on. That I sort of, this little box representing multi-level capabilities that provide an infrastructure, where higher level capabilities depend upon the integration of capabilities of lower level on like that. So the whole infrastructure capabilities is there to look at. We've never really seriously looked at that before. And in fact, I started around. It's sort of another paradigm window that opened up for me. You don't find anybody who's talking about that whole thing. No discipline seems to be responsible for it. Well, what's this augmentation system? Well, a whole system augmentation comprised of what I ended up dividing it into two categories, subsystems, a tool subsystem and a human subsystem. Well, let's just take a detour now and look at that. I said, well, what we have to start with is Mr. and Mrs. or Miss Human. And what I very rapidly became oriented about was the knowledge work capability from that. But anyway, here's the simple engineering model. You got motor mechanisms by which you can affect the outside world. You got sensory and perceptual mechanisms by which you can sort of observe and perceive what's going on. And you have mental apparatus that can process all of that. And in fact, we often get the model that we're talking about all the conscious in that little circle. That's what's really important, huh? Well, I used to draw that very large. And the unconscious, just out of deference to my better educated wife, I would put it in there. And in the ensuing 30 years, I've really learned a lot about how tremendously important that unconscious part of your mental mechanism is, and the conscious part's very important too. But boy, and I don't mean fancy psychotherapeutic talk about the unconscious. I just mean that there's so many things that you filter out, you observe. There are so many amazing talents you have that come from you don't know where, that they're unconscious. And anyway, so what happens to your capability infrastructure? So in very primitive people, or even animals, you find they're getting a lot of skills and knowledge and training or modeling after the society around them, and they'll build a capability structure. But it doesn't come with the machinery. What comes with the machinery is a latent capability to absorb skills and to sense things and generate perception, but you have to adapt to an environment before you develop your capability infrastructure. So there's some kinds of skills and knowledge you have to build that augment you to provide that limited capability infrastructure. Well, as the world progressed and you started being social with customs and methods and language, etc., that capability infrastructure got much more sophisticated and started doing a much better job of harnessing the latent capabilities in the human. In other words, this system over here augments the human in order to produce that kind of capability. So this was just immensely important to me to do it. So you're talking about paradigms. What I'm unfolding for you is this my private inner thing that's been driving me. This unfolded 32, 31, 30 years ago. And it just had a tremendous impact. But it also set me apart and created a great deal of isolation. It generated the things for which I got this pretty award. Nope, pushed the wrong button. So as all this grew, and I've been very interested in reading anthropological studies of primitive societies to find out, before they had artifacts of any great degree, how sophisticated all of this could get to be actually, to develop a capability infrastructure. It's amazing. And boy, I began to think more and more about language as being an augmentation invention that was incredibly powerful and beautiful invention like that, see? So okay, that turns out what I spun out on. Well then you say, the societies began to use artifacts, and that further enriched all that. But an introduction of every artifact here would cause a concurrent sort of shifting in orientation over here. And this was the big, big things for me to start realizing. It says, this evolution of this augmentation has been going on since way before history. And I was thinking I was going to come along with some jazzy new stuff over here and revolutionize it and augment people. Look, it's already augmented, just tremendously beautiful, sophisticated sort of thing. So what I should do is go out and find out what professional disciplines deal with this augmentation system. And surely somebody must, it's so important. Big vacuum. Paradigm issue. Somehow that system is not something in our vocabulary visible. So I had to give it my own name, the augmentation system. And it doesn't go over very well. It takes a long time for me to get people to hear about it and talk about it, and pretty soon they're talking about some technology way over here. Or if they're social scientists, they're talking about something just over here. And you're saying, God dang it, please listen. It's an integrated system that co-evolved. And you can't come along and just throw something brand new in here and think that's going to automate this side. You know, it's going to start a set of evolutions in which the coevolution will make something very different here. So as this part evolved, we got, say the 1960 or 70 era, where we had lots of sophisticated stuff in here. And you said, boy, that was quite a system. So as you introduce all the computer technology, what's happening? Boy, are you changing the world, especially if you're interested in the information and knowledge stuff. Wow, are you changing things over here, especially for the language, and then a whole bunch of other stuff on up in here will change. So, and then here's where that scaling study I did came in. Because in every natural, organic organism environment, the change of part of the dimensions of it in any significant scale would produce qualitative differences past a certain point. You change the scale quantitatively, okay, you get quantitative differences. It's inevitable comes the point at which you get qualitative differences that unless you're prepared for it and oriented, come as a complete surprise. The aeronautics people will realize that an airplane, if you build an exact scale model 1/10 size, wouldn't fly. See? Unless you change some of the other things like the density of the air and so on, which wasn't very practical. So anyway, and there's no organism. So there's one way of looking at this that says if in some biological organism you suddenly introduce, very suddenly in terms of the evolutionary scale in which it was physiologically evolving, if you suddenly produced a new nervous system, brand new nervous system that would tremendously accelerate speed, flexibility, capacity, processing, memory, etc., sensory perception, if all that nervous system suddenly just were tremendously enhanced, great. Do you think the organism would just sort of now be a little faster and a little smarter? Hell no, it would start inventing brand new organs, brand new working relationships between them. Probably its limb structure would change because the coordination could be so much better. It probably would change the way it's prowled the earth. It'd just be a very, very different whole organism. So pushing on this, and then along in the mid-70s, they start talking about office automation. And I just got flooded right out of existence. There's no way I could talk to them about, hey, you don't automate all the old things. You may just for fun of it. But the real power is going to be when you start changing this so you can really harness that. Carpentry changed a great deal when you got new kinds of tools and new materials. Why do you expect that our knowledge work isn't going to just change drastically? So I concentrate a lot on this language area in there as being such a magical thing. And I said, hey, one of the interesting things about the language was when we started externalizing. We take the symbols in our mind that represents the thoughts and the concepts and the relationships that we have in a language, etc., and we find a way to externalize them. So here's an external representation that conveys some knowledge and ideas and reasons, etc., in my mind to give you. So when printing became flexible and powerful and the world adopted it, and there was huge changes in that whole system. And then we went along, and along came computers. And what do we think of? We don't think of it as a new medium. that supplants that old, stiff, flat, non-changeable, two-dimension thing. We now got a multidimensional medium that can make a much better map in that medium of what's actually in our minds, if we stop to think about it. So I just said, wow, not only that, you could really make the media you're going to have such that a much more accurate map. But my God, this thing, you've got to put in all relationships and all volts, you know, it'd be so much work. Oh, wait a minute, you could get the computer interactively to help you establish that. Oh, great, so maybe you can make them. But Jesus, there'd be so many internal pointers and everything else like that, it'd be a real mess to read. Oh, wait, you can get the computer to act as an instrument to look at that complex structure and give you a view that supports your need for understanding at that moment. Great. Structuring, viewing, what's next? Or moving around. Oh yes, you can be much more mobile because the computer can give you a view around. Great. Mobility. And viewing of all sorts of relationships. So anyway, I said, hey, that's a dimensional change. And in changing all this whole system, it'd be very handy to go about its evolution by establishing some of the major new dimensional things and then letting them evolve. Because it's very, very hard to evolve into a really different new thing. So I said, why don't I just build this thing and get going? So that's where the hypertext multimedia thing came from, is out of that in this model. And it's still, to me, extremely important. And a lot of other stuff came out of this model that that's too. In fact, I got 8 minutes and 53 seconds left to tell you the next 30 years. Well, maybe I can just be absent-minded about it and we'll never even mention it. So, trying to get ideas across to people in those days about, they said, why would just being faster make it any better? So one day I came into work and tied that on there and says, here, write your notes next time you sit in a lecture or something. Try to write. Well, the photographer that took this off to photograph it really cheated a lot. That's no way what it would look like when you write. Big scrawling letters. Every once in a while there's a gap because you have to rest. So it was just a happenstance of fate that our musculature and our design and engineering gave us writing tools that were more flexible than that, right? Think of the difference that it would have been if it had been that. So I says, okay, listen to that. What if it goes the other way? You can't just summarily figure out what's going to happen in there if you go the other way and make it smarter. Here's another thing. There's this whole thing about, well, if you make much changes in that human system, people are going to have trouble. You can only, they're not going to want to change. You got to make it easy to learn and natural to use and stuff like that. I've been fighting that all these years. I said, wait, listen, there's a paradigm issue here. Easy to learn for whom? Natural to use for whom? Like ice skates, easy to learn, natural to use. Oh, for the ice skater, Jesus, no. You get on them first, they just think you're on skis, like that. So anyway, suppose people had just gotten this wheeled vehicle stuff to just get started. And you can come into my showroom and look, you can get on right away and pedal off like nothing, easy to learn. So that, of course, is the way to do it. This stuff, you fall over, it's going to take you hours to learn, it's confusing, you'll have users rebelling, etc. like that. And so the world just gets better and better at tricycles. So you stop. Right, so you say, you go look in your organization, how am I going to get past the tricycle stage to really learn what new vehicles for thinking and moving around information space would be like? See? I'm not going to get it by building a two-wheel device and having it to people and say, what do you think? And the funny thing about it is, I'll bet you if we had a quiz in this room about how many people can't ride bikes, well, you wouldn't say anyway. So everybody can ride a bike. What do you think you do when you ride a bike? Could you describe the detailed algorithms about what your body does when you ride along and turn corners and start and stop on a bike? I bet you couldn't, because I got turned on once. I was going to make a two-wheeled car. And I loaded with big heavy gyroscopes and such, until one day when I was motorcycling up on the trails, and some guy with a great big heavy Harley Davidson slipped, and we three of us had to stop and help him get it upright because it was so heavy. And it really made me think, he doesn't go along the freeway like that, balancing himself. So I got to thinking about, no, you steer the wheels under you. Riding down in your hands, well, they fix the steering front end and stuff, so if you tip the bike a little bit, that automatically turns the wheel. So you ride on your hands by shifting your weight like that. I could ride on your hands, I could ride backwards without your hands. I could ride forward, turn around, ride backwards, turn around, ride forwards without even getting off the bike. So you start thinking about that. How many of these guys are tremendous racers? So you say, how many of the skills that we develop and use every day are we sort of unaware, we're unconscious of what we're doing? So you have to be consciously aware of some skill before you can acquire it? No, perfect proof right there. You can go start learning and using it. So there are latent skills. That's what really turns me on. There are latent capabilities and skills in human and their knowledge work that I'm just dead sure, because we haven't even started exploring what you can do with that new medium and with the new kind of processes and new methods and new conventions and the new ways we map our concepts out in there and the new way we portray to ourselves, that we can harness and do a much better job of matching to what we have here as machinery. Because the current conventions and the way we do it match in an image of here's hard copy and here's this other, without thinking that that's not the way God particularly intended for us to read or think, you know, like that. It's kind of a wonder, did God intend us? You know, there's quite a controversy about whether there's machinery in here that's explicitly established for language or whether we're just a smart general purpose thing that can adopt the languages. But in any event, having spoken languages seems to be, they assume it occurred after we stopped evolving, and certainly written languages did. So you say, is there a God-given way in which we were meant to externalize our images or portray them to ourselves? Jesus, no, we got all this kind of perceptual mechanisms that is very, very sophisticated, and that we're probably just hardly harnessing it to the tasks and capabilities. Anyway, I've been sitting on that for 30 years, driving forward like that through, and I'm totally convinced. So there are a few other models we need to go after. And don't worry, you weren't getting off that easy. I only got another 47 slides in the next 3 minutes. I think there are some things once in a while I do give up, and I might give up here in 3 minutes. So anyway, pragmatic coevolution between the human and system, that's just what you have to find. So if you're going to have a strategy, it's got to be a real down-to-earth strategy, recognizing humans for what they are, beautiful creatures, but they need to co-evolve all of this in their organization. So what would be the most payoff to go after? See, what first capability improvements would you go after? Well, we need an investment criteria. Any useful strategic investment criteria? Yes, indeed. So here's what I started to do there, from what I call an ABC model of improvement. And I want you to hear that, because it'd be really interesting to me to have this community take a look at this and have some real dialogue with me. So I said, all right, ordinarily what you think about goes on in your business. All the activity, classify that as A activity. Everything you can think about it does, from product development, noise making, hiring, firing, you know, all that stuff, A. So then you say, I've got a human and a tool system underneath it that provides it its capability. And now I know that I need to improve some of that capability infrastructure, and I want to get about it. So let's do it. Oh, well, it says, if you're going to do that, call any activity that's improving the augmentation or the capability of doing the A work. It can be done by the same people or whatever. Just call that B activity. It's very interesting. So if I come out with a strategy to your place and I say, I got a strategy for how you can improve. I want to talk to your B people. I want to talk to who's in charge of B. And well, so one of the funny lacks out there, again, it's a paradigmatic thing or something, that people don't talk about that. But I had to start thinking like this in order to try to say, why was I missing out in trying to talk to people? Well, even more, he says, look, if the urgency by which organizations are faced with change and challenge are steaming up and the complexity is steaming up, B's got to get better and better. Aha, you guessed. So he says, hey, there, without your knowing it maybe, but if you're starting to get better and better at improving yourself, there's activity going on, C activity, that's improving that. So this was very important when I started thinking 30 years ago. That's too big a challenge for research or something like that to do. Why not strategy? Oh, the strategy. So basically look at that and say, you know, are there capabilities that you could go out and pick? There are lots of things you could do to improve A. But suppose you started isolating, thinking, what are those capabilities I could choose to improve that would improve A, that if deployed appropriately would also improve B? And look, that one investment will not only give me a step function here, but a first derivative here for the next things I improve on. And I said, well, what's more, pretty soon I was thinking about this one. Hey, so then that's led me in the last years to spend a lot more time thinking about what goes on in the C activity world. And you know, I have yet to be able to find some company that can answer that for me clearly. What's your investment ratios to A, B, and C? Who's in charge of C? You probably find a quality person nowadays in B, etc. But is that the whole infrastructure? Well, no, he's down in manufacturing. Well, why not whole? Okay, but if you want to improve this, what's the mechanism, the processes, the budget and stuff that's improving your improvement process? Well, it turns out that they really start to get some collaborative things, and this is where 30 years ago the business about supporting a certain kind of knowledge work, basically it's collaborative, collective knowledge work for developing, that's where the Kodiak term comes from. That capability is a concurrent development, integration, and application of knowledge. And there isn't any name for that collection of capabilities that underlies everything. And it's a capability you guys are exercising now. You're gathering some new information, knowledge that you're going to integrate into what you're developing and what you're applying. And those processes are all going on concurrently. They're going on concurrently within you and with your colleagues. Your team is doing it concurrently with other teams and with other parts of the organization. So that's a constant thing going on. Facilitating that turned out in ways you could deploy it would have the highest leverage of any I've been able to think of in these 30 years. So the bootstrapping comes out saying, I'm going to go after Kodiak very heavily. To do that, I'm going to push as far ahead and as fast as I can in the technology that will advance it. There are practical things about how you make big advances, like moving from a tricycle to a bicycle. You don't do it by a whole bunch of people you're trying to encourage to make it once. You got to do it by small teams, and then they find ways to move other and transfer the technology. So the whole technology transfer is something you'd like to facilitate, and so the Kodiak process does great. And after you start working on those kind of concepts, and you get to the place where you say, oh, you know, between two different organizations, their C activities are not that much different. And if their A activities might be very different, but C aren't, A activities might be highly proprietary. By the time you get down to C, it's easy to make an argument, like the quality people are sharing a great deal of stuff in here. So he says, all right, why don't I get special kinds of shared C work, a C community, a special kind of consortium. So that's the kind of bootstrapping strategy I see talking about, is trying to say, hey look, I can go through all the rest of the details in that and really support it a lot. But the real thing would be a C community, a consortium, that in ways in which it can bootstrap. Its customers are your B people. Everybody in some real endeavor ought to have a customer that they really quality support. Who's supporting the B? So B is the customer of your C and your C community. All right, A is the customer of B. Your outside customers are customers of there. So you've got that whole thing, you're focused on that. You got things coming back, you've got to know your customers. So A has to keep knowing about what's going on out there. B has to keep knowing there, so you want a two-way flow. Technology transfer, lots of lessons learned, and objects. Technology transfer, lots of lessons learned, etc. So it really starts. The model for how this community can work is a model for all kinds of collaborative projects can go on inside. The model for how that community can work is a model for how consortia can work. A model for how the what is it, there's a Keiretsu, you know, a real business network of business organizations. You think if some of the proposed new ways of organizations can be structured so people are much more flexible working relationships, etc., that's setting up the model for that. So anyway, I'm just so convinced that augmentation, the whole system approach, is someday going to produce really extraordinary capabilities in organizations. I'm so convinced that the world needs it immensely that I absolutely cannot retire or sit down really until this kind of bootstrapping gets a start, because I really, really feel like that's a strategy that could make a difference. And damn if I don't, this pledge I made 42 years ago, how can I die without having tried it, see? So I almost tried dying 5 years ago, but I got cancer and got over that because, you know, how could I finish this if I die of cancer? Anyway, one of the interesting things is it almost seemed like an accident that I got invited here, but as I looked over the papers and heard the thing, read what's going on, and it seemed like it's a very novel kind of community as it stands now in order to take on some of these things, the organizations, etc., like that. And it'd be interesting to work more with you. And the world needs dialogue, and I need people to interact with, because being off on a paradigm that is different from the world, it's really sort of shows you like how envious I'd be of you guys. All you've got a community where the things that are important you can come and talk about, interact. You kind of have the same vocabulary. I haven't had anything like that, and it really, really makes a difference. And so anyway, until communities get going that share some of this, so what I would really like is if in some way you can start working in to see, hey, how many of these concepts about augmentation, about capability infrastructure, about ABC models, about the Kodiak as a key one, about the deployment in C community, how many of those concepts fit within your world? So I want to, you'll get a quiz on that tomorrow afternoon. So I am going to wrap it up. I'm only 7 minutes over, and I really welcome the chance to come and pour all this out. So thank you very much.
Who's absent-minded?
That gives you some idea how heavy that thing is. It is really an impressive piece of metal. Thank you, Doug, for a very inspirational message. And I happen to agree with you that this community is one that will find an affinity with the Bootstrap construct and the Bootstrap project. And anyone who has some ideas on how we can pursue this further at Hicks, Bruce and I would be glad to hear from you. The reception in Doug's honor will take place now. It's not raining, but we didn't take a chance. It's right down the hall in front of the reception area. Don't stop at the first food station or we'll never get through. Go on past. There's 3 more tables beyond. Thanks again, Doug, for a wonderful talk.